I'm Bucky Boone. I'm co-chair of Appalachian Peace Education Center, and I'm excited to welcome all of you here today to learn about the health of the people in Unicoi County living near nuclear fuel services. First of all, I want to recognize the real important partnership that we are having in this project with the Irwin Citizens Awareness Network. I know Trudy Wallach and Barbara O'Neill and Linda are here. Thank you for all of your work. They've been working 13 years to raise awareness about the issues surrounding the Nuclear Fuel Services Corporation in Irwin. And the Appalachian Peace Education Center has been working for the last 40 years for peace and justice in Southwest Virginia and East Tennessee. Unfortunately, to date, we've been outspent by the military-industrial complex on the order of about 25 billion to 1. So we have had to depend on volunteers. Luckily, in the recent past, we've gained 2 important volunteers who've come along with professional expertise. First, Michael Ketterer, Professor Emeritus of Northern Arizona University, has shown that uranium pollution from nuclear fuel
But I still can't hear.
has fouled the Nolichucky watershed, the nearby soil, and the air.
Try those little buttons up there?
Through his research has been really important. And I just want to point out that neither nuclear fuel services or our governments, either state, local, or federal, have been willing to do that research. Now another volunteer, Joe Mangano of Radiation and Public Health Project, has studied the public health data of nuclear fuel services neighbors in Unicoi County. Again, something that our governments have failed to do. Now I want to ask Eleanor Goodrich to introduce Joe Mangano so that he can tell us about his study.
Thanks, Bucky. So today we will be hearing from Joseph Mangano, who directs the Radiation and Public Health Project, an independent group of scientists and health professionals dedicated to research and education of health hazards from nuclear reactors and weapons. He holds a master's degree in public health from the University of North Carolina and an MBA from Fordham University. Mangano has written and co-written dozens of articles in medical and scientific journals, as well as authored several books on radiation, health, and the nuclear industry. He played a prominent role in the Tooth Fairy Project, the study of strontium-90 levels in 5,000 baby teeth, which remains the only study of radiation levels in bodies of Americans living near nuclear plants. Today, he will be presenting the findings of his recent health study and death rates in Unicoi County. Thank you, Joe.
Thanks, Eleanor, and thanks all for joining us today. As Eleanor said, what I am doing in the next few minutes is to present this new study, which basically shows that for several decades now, there has been a decline in health trends near the NFS site. I'll start also by saying that for a long time, 70 plus years of the atomic era, the issue of health effects has always taken a back seat for various reasons, to the point where there are really, at least in the case of NFS, there are really no studies answering basic questions like what are the cancer rates near NFS? What are the death rates near NFS? We really don't know. There's only been one national study of cancer near nuclear plants, and that was done in the late 1980s by the National Cancer Institute, but it was only done at the insistence of Senator Kennedy, Edward Kennedy, and it did not include the NFS. It included 62 other plants, and now, of course, it is outdated. There are reports that cancer studies were done near NFS in 1979, these were reported in several newspapers back then, but recent attempts to obtain these from the CDC, and the CDC replied that they had been destroyed. So no one knows about that. And most recently, in 2009, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission proposed a cancer study near 7 nuclear sites, including NFS. And then 7 years later, 2016, out of nowhere, it canceled the project after $10 million of expenses, and they claimed it was because of expenses. So really, this is just the beginning, and I'd even call it a preliminary study. What we did was the following. We selected Unicoi County as the county of focus.
Well, I guess
Now,
not
this
just
comes
thing, but
from
yeah,
the
again.
NCI, the National Cancer Institute
Actually, we have a
study
speaker this
in the
week.
late 80s, which basically looked only at the home county of nuclear plants. And like the NCI study, we took a ratio of cancer and deaths from other causes in Unicoi County versus the United States and measured them over time. The information comes from the CDC's website, which keeps a record of all deaths in the United States beginning in 1968. And this is just a preliminary study. Said that twice already, but what the areas we looked at were death rates from all cancers combined and death rates from all causes combined. Okay, what the basic finding is the following. From the late 1960s through the 70s and the 80s into the early 1990s, Unicoi County's death rates, both from cancer and all other causes, were pretty similar to what the US rates were. In fact, in the case of cancer, in the early 70s, the county death rate was 24% below the US. That has changed drastically. The average rates from Unicoi County have given way to much higher rates. Most recently, the cancer death rate is 40% above the US. The death rate from all causes is 45% above, and the premature death rate from all causes, that's persons dying before age 75, is 62%. And I am going to share my screen now. I hope you all can see this. It is a graph of 3 lines. The yellow line is all deaths combined. The red line is all deaths from persons age under 75, and the brown line is cancer deaths. And each of the dots represents a 5-year period, beginning in 1969 to 73. And as you basically see, for the first couple of dots as we move along, they are pretty much close to 0, which means the county rate is the same as the US rate. But then after the early 90s, we see a very sharp, rapid increase to the point where in the most recent period, which is 2019 to 2020, again, those cancer deaths 40% higher, all deaths 45% higher, and all premature deaths 62% higher. There are preliminary data from 2021 and 22, and basically it looks like those final dots are going to stay where they are. We can call this an unexpected death trend. If nothing changed to affect death rates, those 3 lines should have been flat all the way across. Okay, if the death rates The early 70s was the same county versus the US, should have been the same all the way through, but that didn't happen. This raises question, of course, the question why. And there are numerous risk factors that can affect death rates, of course. There are personal habits, there's access to medical care, there's socioeconomic issues such as poverty. But in the report, I mentioned that there is nothing really apparent that would account for any of these. It's not obvious that all of a sudden the poverty rate exploded in Unicoi County compared to the U.S., or that smoking rates increased, or access to medical care declined. But some factor or other factors are responsible, and certainly we conclude that the continued operation at the NFS site with the variety of radioactive chemicals it produces, each of which decays incredibly slowly. They're all the radioisotopes at NFS have decay rates that sometimes are in the millions of years. They're basically there in the environment forever. The accumulation of this means that NFS should be considered not just a factor, but quite possibly a major factor in changing this, in these changes. So from here, several things need to happen. One is the obvious, more research needs to be done. These were just a few measures of health that we looked at. The report goes into what causes of death are included in all causes, and pretty much every major cause, not just cancer, but heart disease, lung disease, digestive disease, urinary disease, have high rates. It also looks at the age groups, and it seems like the younger adults have the biggest gaps compared to the U.S. That needs to be improved. Also, another issue is, does the unusual rates, do they stop at the county border, or are adjoining counties also experiencing the same trends? That's a question that needs to be addressed as well. I guess the final thing is that while we're still improving in our analysis, this is a matter that should be shared with members of the public and public officials. It's really unconscionable that this was really not known until now. I mean, if you think about it, even in a small county like Unicoi, over half a century or more, we see these rates get higher. They look kind of sanitized on a graph or in a report, but every single one of these is a tragedy. Okay, someone who dies of cancer or of any other disease, especially at prematurely. It is an agony to the person, it is agony to their family and their loved ones and to the community. So it needs to be taken seriously and not just ignored. And I call upon the regulators of the NFS site to look beyond just, okay, we did release radiation, but it's below permissible limits. Therefore, there's no risk to health. No, we have to get past that and to have a more objective and creative analysis. Thank you very much for your time, and I'm more than happy to hear your comments and take questions.
Also, if anyone wants to put questions in the chat, we can read those.
If you have a question, please raise your hand or
I see Mary Olson's hand is up.
Mary, go ahead.
Thank you. And thank you, Joe. And thank you for everybody who organized this event. Joe, we're accustomed to talking about populations. It's often quite appropriate. My work focuses on life cycle. And it looks to me that the young adults that you're referring to today are second, possibly third generation. Do you want to comment on that? Because people don't move so much in this area. Very deep roots.
Yes, it is likely that most people here are natives of the area, if not the county. I think it's interesting that younger adults have the highest excesses, because older adults were born before NFS began operating. Okay, and in their early years, going back not just to childhood, but to infancy and even during the fetal period, they were not exposed to any releases from the plant. And we know that while radiation harms everyone, a certain dose of radiation is much, much more toxic to a young child, an infant, or a fetus. All right, so I think that's another red flag that could be raised for NFS being a factor in this unexpected decline.
Joe, Kathy Helms had two questions in the chat. How do these rising death rates jibe with NRC assertions that its regulations are protective of public health? And how do these findings in Unicoi County compare to those of other communities you have studied?
Again, the NRC, along with other regulators, including the Energy Department, which regulates NFS, takes the stance that permissible limits, which were developed under, let's just say, a lot of people had problems with, and they were based on the survivors of the Hiroshima and the Nagasaki bombs, indicate safe limits. And it's very clear, not just for me, that there is no safe dose of radiation. A little poison is still poison. And do not take my word for this. I will refer you to a 1990 report. It's called BEER 5, the Committee on Biological Effects of Ionizing Radiation. It is a book that's updated every decade or so, and it's thick with references, with studies, hundreds of them. And their conclusion, this is back in 1990, and they've stuck with it ever since, is that the radiation takes a straight line relationship with health. In other words, one rate of exposure, one cancer, two rate of exposure, one cancer. It's called linear no threshold. And no threshold means even at lowest doses, there is risk. Okay, so that takes care of the NRC's stance. They should look more at what the experts say. The other question is, what about other areas? This study makes about the 8th, I think, that we've done over the years at different plants around the US. Most of them are commercial nuclear power plants. And we found basically the same thing. We find that before a plant begins operating, local disease and death rates are similar to the US, sometimes lower. And early in their operations, that kind of stays the same. And then at some point, even a couple of decades after startup, that line goes up again and again. We most recently found similar results near the Portsmouth plant, another uranium enrichment plant in southern Ohio. The results were even worse than this. 62% higher rate for premature deaths. Theirs is 78, which is almost double. These are among the highest in the United States. So, so these are relatively consistent. Again, what we would expect if radiation was a factor here.
Let's see. Mike Still with the Kingsport Times asked, how would you correlate these findings with Virginia's proposal to locate a small nuclear reactor power plant in Southwest Virginia? Probably should say small nuclear reactor power plants in Southwest Virginia.
It's unfortunate that any proposals for new nuclear plants, whether it's a small modular reactor or the ones that they've been building in Georgia for the last 17 years, does not take local health risk into consideration. It is just ignored. And although it's important that the operators of the plants do the best they can to reduce risk, it really is the primary responsibility lies with regulators. And I'm not just talking about the NRC or the Energy Department. I'm also talking about health officials, okay? Whether it's the county health department or the state health department or the National Cancer Institute. They should be taking much more of an aggressive effort to understand what happens to local health after nuclear plants begin operating. And again, they just have not done so in the over 70 years of the atomic age.
And a caller, Galaxy A20, has their hand up. You want to ask your question?
Well, that's me, Jerry Scardo in Clintwood. And I really appreciate y'all. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I appreciate y'all doing this. I had no idea the help down there in Unicoi County. And I really hope that some magazines or something like the Atlantic magazine picks this story up. We've been following, these proposals for small reactors, all over the coal fields. It's a plural when you listen to their language, and they won't let us participate if they can help it. But anyway, I had no idea these health statistics. They are shocking, really shocking. I hope everybody in Unicoi County finds this out. And I know on the Nolichucky that people was trying to make their living rafting, boating, and you'd see the buses hauling people and, tourism on the water. So y'all keep up the good work. And I referred some of this information to the epidemiologist person in our family, and I think along with the public officials to get this information out to the epidemiologists. Although most of them are in a university and can't do a thing, they can at least be aware. So that's my ideas.
Thank you, Jerry. Yes, I agree. Public health officials should come out publicly and at least acknowledge this and discuss this with members of the public. I hear your comments about the new proposed reactors. I want to add to that. Pretty much what I've said today is not pleasant, but we have published several studies taking a look what happens to local health when nuclear plants close. These are nuclear power plants. And we looked at 8 plants, and we found that in the areas near every one of those 8 plants, in the first 2 years after shutdown, the infant death rate plunged, and the rate of new cancers diagnosed in children 4 and under plunged. Okay, as I said before, the very young are most affected by a dose of radiation. So we would expect to see any results from them first. And then later we did a more longer term study over 20 years near a closed plant in California. And sure enough, the rates went down. I think there was over 20 years, 4,000 something fewer cancer cases compared to what was happening before shutdown. So that is certainly one consideration here. And at very least, people need to know this. I mean, it shouldn't be a secret, because they're entitled to know what is risking their health.
Speaking of which, Charlotte in the chat asks, when the people of Unicoi County are told of this study, what is their reaction?
If others want to answer that, I don't know. I guess we'll find out soon enough.
Have you learned of reactions in other communities where you've done this type of study?
Yes. I mentioned the most recent similar study we did was in Southern Ohio near the Portsmouth plant. And earlier this month, we held a similar conference to this. It was in person and online, and 70 people showed up in person, and I think another 80 people showed up online, and you know, it's now posted on YouTube, and it's getting views. I should say that it's unfortunate that no public officials showed up. They were all invited, and none responded. And the basic, basically they are concerned by these. I mean, they weren't surprised. No one was really shocked, but they were quite concerned that the rates were as high as they were.
There's another question. Let's see where. Merritt Moore asked, did you ever find the coverage buried in the Johnson City Press in the mid to late 70s? She came home and found an article stating that NFC had cited NFS for a release of 23 pounds of enriched uranium in the air the previous August.
I'm not aware of that, but if any one of the citizens here want to comment.
This is Merritt. I just looked, when I looked at your graph, I wondered, because I can go back, I keep journals, I can figure that out and maybe find that article. But I wondered, given that young people began developing cancer, you know, in the several years after it, continuing, whether that large release might have affected those kids who were outside in August, and then it wasn't reported until nearly Christmas of that year. But I'll look for that. Thanks.
Thank you, Merritt. Ladorna, I can't pronounce your last name, asked, is asbestos contamination a problem in Irwin as it was in Babcock and Wilcox nuclear plants in Pennsylvania?
I'm not aware of any asbestos contamination, unusual in the asbestos contamination. It's an issue nationwide, of course. But whether NFS contributed to it, I'm unaware of it.
And Ken Little, you have a question. Why don't you ask it?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
What relevance does the data from Unicoi County have to people living downriver. And there's been references to cancer 90 miles down the Nolichucky River from where NFS is located. Can this data from this particular Unicoi County study be extrapolated out to locations like Greene County and others downriver?
Well, I think two things need to happen, Ken. One is a continuation of what Dr. Ketterer has begun, and that is to take samples and measure how much of this radiation shows up in the environment, not just very close to the NFS site, but as you say, further downriver. You know, it's a logical question that if some of these chemicals such as uranium and plutonium get into the river, that they're going to move downriver and of course get into the food chain, especially if people eat fish caught from the river, even if the chemicals move into the ground as well. That needs to be done. And then, of course, the second thing would be a continuation of what this report did, to take a look at the changes in health downriver versus upriver. Which would be very helpful if we were able to know where, in fact, this radiation went. It can be spread through winds, not just downriver. We should do the same for winds. If there are prevailing winds, we should identify the downwind area and take a look at changes there compared to the upwind areas. Again, we're making up for lost time. This should have been done all along, but at least we've started now.
Thank you.
And Laurel Goodrich of the Oak Ridge Environmental Peace Alliance has a question. Laurel, you want to ask that question?
Sure. I really thank you for the presentation. It's stunning. It's disturbing. It's powerful. I am recently involved with ORIPA, the Oak Ridge Environmental Peace Alliance. And so forgive me for my ignorance. I probably should know this, but are there any similar studies of the counties surrounding the Y-12 and other Oak Ridge Reservation facilities?
As Eleanor mentioned, I'm the author or co-author of 39 peer-reviewed journal articles. The very first one I did, I'm going to embarrass myself, the year was 1994, it's a long time ago, was about Oak Ridge. And that study took a look at the changes in cancer mortality from beginning in 1950, soon after the plant had opened up until the 1980s. And sure enough, the areas closest to the plant had the highest increases downwind from the plant. Yeah, it was the first published. I have not updated it yet, but because of Oak Ridge's continued operations for such a long time, it certainly should be made more current.
I think I saw Terry Clark raising his hand. Terry?
Harry, you're on mute. Can you unmute yourself?
Right now.
Can I be heard?
Now
Hello? Okay, well, thank you for the presentation. And do we know whether anyone in any of the county medical societies or state medical societies or local practitioners have expressed concern or other reactions about this information?
maybe that's best answered by one of the local citizens. I'm unaware of any, although I believe the county and state health department should participate in this discussion.
Hmm.
Terry,
That's-
the
Certainly
report
sounds
was-
like a challenge we have then, yeah.
Yeah, the report is only being released today. And we're thankful for the media being present to help us raise public awareness, which will include, of course, the county health departments. But we will make an attempt to reach out to them directly. And it's possible too that some of the dozens of emails that were sent out to the to invite people to this event did include not only the public elected officials, but other elected officials of other public officials, including health people. So yeah, thanks for that question, and we've got more work to do, is no doubt. Thanks.
Do we know if there's been previous reaction in the community over the years?
Yes, when the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry did its public health assessment in 2000, and it was ongoing from 2006 and finally released in 2007. There was a huge turnout of people raising their concerns about health. And then when the National Academies of Sciences were contracted, so to speak, by the NRC to do the update of the health study around nuclear facilities, and as Joe had mentioned, was to include in the preliminary report NFS. There was a meeting in Irwin that brought out hundreds of people expressing their concerns about the health, and including the deaths of their children. And then the study was canceled. So we will, Irwin Citizens Awareness Network and the APEC were so appreciative of the public outreach that APEC has been helping us with. We'll do our best to raise this issue as far as we can.
One suggestion I have, I noticed that the Tennessee Department of Health has a website with a contact us section. We could all send Joe's report to them so that they at least have it. Laura Mays has a question. Who ultimately has the power to change the radiation health limits? What government agency?
You see her?
Power to change the radiation health, what?
The radiation, I think she means the amount of radiation that's considered safe. The level.
Permissible limits?
Yes.
That really came from the, well, it was the Atomic Energy Commission years ago, and it became the Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
So if you were an activist who wanted to target this issue and bring more public awareness and have meetings with officials and, really target, who would you target to say, we have to stop this argument about allowable limits? Where would you go?
The Energy Department, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, often state, I don't know about Tennessee, but often states have bureaus of radiation protection. And then, of course, for all the health regulators, county health department, the state health department, and even the federal National Cancer Institute. All of them play a role in this.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I've just added to the chat the contact link for the Tennessee Department of Health if anyone wants to reach out to them or any of the people that Joe just mentioned. Additionally, I'm sending right now a link to the report. Please share that with anyone you think of, officials, any of these departments, anyone Joe mentioned, anyone that you come up with. People need to know this information, and the more that we share, the more people will find out and the more we can potentially do something.
Kathy Helms had a couple of more questions. She asked, did you look at the data for surrounding counties downwind and downstream? And do you believe it is safe to assume that these findings are demonstrating the cumulative impact of NFS's off-site contamination?
No, I haven't looked at the adjoining counties, although, as I said, it's a logical next step. And as far as, is this conclusive? I'm trying not to be evasive, but there are a number of factors that can affect things like cancer deaths or other deaths from other causes, but and very often they work together. You know, very often you see, I mean, the classic example is we know smoking causes lung disease. We know being a coal miner causes lung disease. But if you're a coal miner who smokes, the risk is more than one and one. It's much higher. All right, and very often that it makes it difficult to, from a research standpoint, identify how much is smoking, how much is radiation, and so on. But I think that is more than likely what's happened here, and certainly NFS emissions have to be in the mix, have to be in the discussion. That is clear. We'll never know exactly how much of the problem was caused by NFS, but I hope I wasn't too evasive.
There are a couple of related questions. Let's see where, I'm sorry. People tend to think jobs. Plus people think it'll happen to someone else, not them. It's hard to get people to care when they think it won't happen. And the related question was, people think nuclear is part of the solution in addition to or instead of solar to our energy problems. How do we educate people about this?
Maybe the best example is tobacco, okay, which goes way back. The discussion, or should I say, prior to the discussion of tobacco's health effects goes way back. The seminal study that came out was 1964, the Surgeon General, and that's when things began to change. That's when let's just say the educational efforts. That means smoking was never banned and still is not banned today, but that's when the educational efforts were really began to ramp up. And that's when we saw fewer people smoking, more people quitting smoking. And of course, with that, the lung cancer rates have gone down considerably since then, even though it's still a common cancer. And I think that's what's going to have to happen here. It's not a personal choice like smoking, but the education has to start now and has to get to the regulators. And I may have left out elected officials. They play a role as well. Okay, they have oversight over what regulators do and whether they're doing their job or not.
Rachel Rosalina of Apple Shop asks, do you know what percentage of the increased death rates are also NFS employees?
I don't. The CDC data doesn't specify employment status. Maybe one of the local citizens can answer that. What percent of Unicoi County residents are employees of NFS, they and their families? I'm going to guess it's pretty substantial.
There are other comments in the chat. They look like comments to me rather than questions. If anyone, Noel and Bob ask, wasn't there an accident there recently? And I think Barb or Linda can talk about that.
Well, and also the percentage of people who work at NFS from Unicoi County is about between 20 and 25%. It's not nearly as much as one would think. Most of the people who work at NFS are from Washington County and Sullivan County. And as far as an accident, yes, they have accidents all the time.
Does anyone else have a question? We can't see everybody at once, so somebody might be asking a question and I don't see their hand.
I can help with that. Mary Olson has had some comments and has her hand up. Would you like to respond?
Yeah, I want to make a brief comment that the type of environmental contamination that I have witnessed from the operations, having visited Irwin and Nuclear Fuel Services several times in the last 23 years, we're not only talking about worker exposure. We certainly are concerned about the workers and their families and would not want to dismiss them as having most likely higher exposures. But taking the aggregate population is appropriate because we've been talking about the wind and the water and other ways that this radioactivity moves in the environment. So my comments in the chat shouldn't be interpreted to be specifically about workers. It's more about the whole support for the facility at all. So I just want to clarify that I believe that Unicoi County is ground zero for the environmental exposures, as I believe Joe does as well.
Yeah, Mary, and in some ways, workers are kind of represent the healthiest people in society. I mean, they're not old, they're of working age, they're healthy enough to hold a full-time job, and they tend to be, I imagine, males more than females. So you've left out, you know, the very young, or the fetuses and infants and children. You left out the very old and people who are unable to work, and you've left out women too. And Mary here has done quite a lot of work trying to educate people that a dose of radiation is more harmful to a female than a male. If I may take all that work you've done and squish it into 5 seconds. Yes, so yes, we should be concerned about workers. They're right there, but it's the whole community that deserve concern.
And Jerry Scardo has her hand up again.
I'll make it just real quick. But when I was young, I thought the enforcement and regulations really work. The older I get, the more I'm aware that there's been weak enforcement, whether it's EPA, DEQ, you name it. And the Hansford plant, where it leaked in, where the stuff leaked into the Columbia River, and the Superfund cleanup will cost 110 billion and take 50 years. That was a highly regulated place. And now our Supreme Court is siding with the money and not the people. So we're in a tough spot. We just have to work harder than hard. That's about all I have to say.
Thank you, Jerry. Mike Still asks, if an SMR was sited in Southwest Virginia, would processing of spent fuel be likely to happen at NFS because of geographic proximity?
I don't know.
I would say it would be done at Energy Solutions, which is co-located with NFS, called Irwin Resin Solutions.
And Kathy Helms asks, do you believe fallout from nuclear tests in Nevada may have contributed to the cancer rate in Unicoi County?
The answer is yes, but it contributed to cancer rates, not just in Unicoi County, but in all of Tennessee and all across the United States, because fallout went everywhere and was returned to the environment through precipitation and which got into the food chain.
There's another question from Laura that maybe Barbara could answer. What political committee is oversight for NRC?
I would say that would be the Government Oversight Committee, the House Government Oversight, and Senate if they have an oversight.
Bucky, this is Sharon. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, it's probably more of a comment, and I couldn't find my hand to raise, so that's why I interrupted here. We're here in Southwest Virginia, along with Jerry and a couple other of our colleagues attending this. And of course, most of you, I hope, know, but you may not know that it's the governor of Virginia's plan to put these SMRs into the coal fields. And they have even come out with a feasibility site where they said they would be on these abandoned mine lands, but they're actually showing them in populated areas. The Nuclear Fuel Service is, a special situation, and it could affect us because our governor has alluded to, well, one way we could deal with radioactive waste is to process it. But this SMR push is happening all over the country. And we are trying with the Clinch Coalition, working now with APEC and the Southern Appalachian Mountain Stewards. We're doing everything we can to get the word out. We have connected now with organizations across the nation. And also the head of the TVA has said that he won't settle for one SMR. He wants at least 20 of them. So it's come to all of our region. And so we have an online petition. We have set up on our website what we're calling an SMR library. And Mr. Mangano, we will be really pushing this study out in every possible way we can. We have distribution now across the nation and across Virginia and elsewhere. So yes, we are being really impacted here in Southwest Virginia, and we'll do everything we can to publicize your study, what is going on in Unicoi County and Irwin, and work overall to address this push for nuclear energy.
And
Thank you, Sharon.
Some of you may not realize that one of the companies that's in the front of the line for the trough for SMRs to make billions of dollars is the parent company of Nuclear Fuel Services out of Lynchburg, Virginia.
And they have already announced that that company will build the SMRs and then ship them to Southwest Virginia.
Mary Olson asked, how do we get a copy of Joe's findings, hard copy or to print? Joe, could you give us the address of your website? Because I saw it on the website and
Yes.
I actually sent it out.
Yes, very easy, radiation.org, and it's the top story on the homepage. You can't miss it.
And also there's a link in the press release, right? I pointed that out to people I sent the press release to.
I've also just added to the chat the direct link to the PDF. And then if you just delete that, everything after the / radiation.org will take you to the larger site. Also, Sharon, did you want to drop the petition you mentioned into the chat so we can follow up on that?
Oh, I don't have access readily right now, but could I send that to Bucky and get it to y'all to send out?
Yes, if you send it to me, I'll send it out to the APEC email list.
Okay.
And if you're not on our email list and want to be, put your email address in the chat. Does anybody else have any other questions for Joe?
Noel, do you have the same question about the SMR library? Was that answered for you?
Yeah, doesn't sound like I'll get it when Bucky sends it out, I guess. I was just wondering if, Joe, are you doing studies in other areas as well?
Oh, yes.
Across the country, you have, this is going.
Yes, we're a small group. We can't get to every site, but we're trying the best we can. Currently, I'm working on one near Diablo Canyon, California, which is the last remaining nuclear power plant in California, which was slated to close in the next 2 years, but now has, thanks to a very large $1 billion+ bailout from government, are going to be running at least 5 more years.
Thank you for your work.
And thank you as well.
Any more questions? Kelly, thank you for coming as part of Nuke Watch. We appreciate the national organization being here.
Thank you so much for all of your work, for dedication and commitment to finding out what's going on, where you're living, and how it's affecting people. And it's unfortunately not unique.
That's part of what we need to remember, that this is happening in Erwin, Tennessee, but it's happening, and Joe is helping expose that this is a danger that's happening all around our country.
Yes, and I would want to also mention that this is an environmental justice issue. I think that the SMRs, the situation that we're facing with this sprinkling of SMRs in low-income communities, and also I want to mention that Unicoi County is listed under the national statistics on income that as a low-income location. And so these things are happening to areas of the country where, like us in Southern Appalachia, where income levels are low, education levels are low. As a longtime environmental justice coordinator for the Sierra Club, one time told me that these corporations can be likened to vultures coming into to an area with the least resistance, and that will continue to happen to us, I believe, until we demand that exposures are unacceptable to us, that zero is the only emission that these companies make. And if they can't, these companies who claim to be able to control the atom, if they can't figure out, if they're not smart enough to figure out how to make those emissions zero, then they should be in another business. That's how I see it, and that's how I have expressed it directly to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in the past, and will continue to take that stand. So thank you. Thank you to everyone. Thank you for the lively discussion. Thank you. Thank you to everyone being here, and for your questions and comments, and Joe for being so really that chart, I believe, is I hope that our friends in the media, and I appreciate everyone who's sending it out, that line graph speaks volumes, and thank you, Joe, for your skills and dedication to this work. Bucky and Eleanor, I pass it on to you. Thank you.
I'll just again thank Joe for all of his work, and thank all of you all for caring about this, the health and safety of people in Irwin and other communities. And if you want to learn more about how communities have fought environmental injustice, Google Ellen Spears and her writing on this issue. And she's written some really good books about this issue. So thank you all for being here.